Hello, good morning. I'm Matt Addison. David Lynch is with me today to have a look at the latest Liverpool news. We've got a couple of different topics to get into. We'll talk about Naby Keita amid some supposed Premier League interest very shortly. We'll talk about Unai Emery as well. He, of course, took over from Steven Gerrard at Aston Villa last night. So be interesting to see how he gets on and that Steven Gerrard comparison. But we'll start with Naby Keita, and he is someone that we've sort of spoken about a number of times on this show and on different shows. He's always a player that seems to draw a bit of attention. People tend to be quite divided around him. Chelsea, Arsenal, and Spurs supposedly are all interested in him, which is interesting, isn't it? It would give a bit of an insight, I think, really into kind of how his stock is amongst the rest of the Premier League. And I suppose it's kind of similar to what we already know. He is a good player if you can keep him fit, and maybe one or two of those clubs might be willing to take that gamble.
Yeah, I think it's one of those that I'd maybe be surprised if it was true, just on the basis that, as you say, there's a really talented player in there. Liverpool have seen that. I think probably the best example of that was last season. He played a really big part in that quadruple push. He's a really, really important squad player and put in a lot of minutes. But I think, in terms of Liverpool's rivals, if there was any interest there, I think they would have similar concerns that Liverpool do in terms of giving him a new contract, which is obviously that, that would be a lot of money to do that. But also then, will that availability continue? Will he be a regular sort of reliable option? And I think, it's going to be hard for him to find another Premier League club. If I'm honest, I think a lot of those clubs will be sceptical about that injury record and fear that they'd end up tied into a sort of 4 or 5 year contract where they're not getting a lot of return for the money, really. And I think there will be clubs interested. I've absolutely no doubt about that because we've seen him at his best, and he's a top player. But I think maybe for the player himself, it would perhaps be better to move away from the intensity of the Premier League. We know it's the most physically intense league, and I just don't think that has suited him at all, to be honest. And I think that's been a big reason behind a lot of his injuries. Perhaps you could say that also playing Jurgen Klopp football has been a bit of a problem for him. We know that it puts big demands on players, and maybe he could play in the Premier League, but elsewhere in a different system, a more sort of a less proactive defensive system. And maybe that would suit him, perhaps. But I think, I think he would maybe be looking to move, but maybe back to Germany when it comes around. And I don't expect him to be signing a new deal at Liverpool, and I maybe don't think he'll be staying in the Premier League either, to be honest.
Yeah, the Bundesliga seems to make a lot of sense to me. I mean, pretty much any league, like you say, would be less intense and less physically demanding than the Premier League. Obviously, the Bundesliga is demanding to a certain extent, but it would seem that the safe bet really is at that kind of age where the next move is going to be an important one to determine his career. If, say, Leipzig came back for him, or if Borussia Dortmund maybe needed a central midfielder next summer, for example, possibly something like that could make a bit of sense for him. And it might just be the right thing to kind of reignite his career, go back to what go back to somewhere where you have obviously been able to stay fit and show what you can do. It would make a lot of sense to me as well. I think for him to go to Germany, that would seem logical.
Yeah, and his availability record in Germany was absolutely fine. There was nothing to get really worried about before he signed for Liverpool in terms of, this guy's going to always be injured. I think that it's definitely just something that's come around since he's joined Liverpool, since he's worked under Jurgen Klopp, and since he's been in the Premier League. So, yeah, like you say, you would hope that he'd be able to go back to the Bundesliga and again, show his best football and play more regularly as well, because, I think that's been one of the big disappointments of the Liverpool career is that he's just, even when he's been fit, he's not really been first name on the team sheet for any prolonged period. He's had little stints here and there where he's been in the team, but then, it's tended to follow an injury or a loss of form. So, I think it's time for him to maybe go back to Germany, as you say, something he knows, a league he knows well. And I think there'll be major interest there, especially because, they won't expect to be an outlay in terms of money and he's available on a free transfer at the end of the season. I think there'll be a lot of German clubs who think we can pour all that money into his contract and we can sign up a player who has torn up this league in the past.
You mentioned before, and I completely agree with you, that it seems unlikely at this stage that he'd get a new contract at Liverpool. I mean, what do you think it would take for Liverpool to change their minds on that? Would he have to stay fit the entire time? Would he have to put in a level of performance that we've not seen from him in a Liverpool shirt. I mean, that kind of seems to me the only way that situation could change, and it doesn't seem that either of those things are pretty likely to happen.
Yeah, well, it would 100%. He'd have to avoid injury between the now and the end of the season. There's no doubt about that. And then, as you say, we'd have to see a performance level that we haven't seen before. I think, even in last season, which I think was his best season for Liverpool, he wasn't really maybe the player that Liverpool thought they were signing initially. Even I think he's a guy who came in, filled in, did a really good job, but not that dynamic, sort of forward-thinking, attacking, dribbling past players. He's never really been that sort of player for Liverpool. I think you'd have to sort of unlock that and really show what he showed in the Bundesliga. And I think even then, there's not an awful lot of time left in this season. Even if you performed at an incredibly high level, I still think Liverpool would have in the back of their minds, this will be a big risk to tie ourselves to this for another 4 years. Just in case, next season the injuries flare up again. And the likelihood is that they would, because that has been the theme of his Liverpool career and his time in England. So I just can't see, I can't see it being resolved with Naby Keita staying at Liverpool. And to be honest, I think that's been the case for quite a while. I think I've said it on this, these morning bulletins and on podcasts before, that I just couldn't see Liverpool committing to more years of Naby Keita. So I think it's going to be, we're going to get to the end of the season and the fresh break will be best for everyone, really.
Yeah, it certainly seems to make the most sense. It doesn't very often happen that you get inside the last year of a contract and then these things change. So 2 or 3 players in that position for Liverpool, it seems like the die might be cast on all 3 of them. But we will move on. Obviously, Steven Gerrard has moved on from Aston Villa. Unai Emery has gone in there, which is an interesting appointment. I think the biggest thing for me with this, it kind of shows really the strength of the Premier League. The fact that Emery has decided to go to Villa. I know they've got a bit of money. I'm sure they're paying him a fair amount, probably a little bit more than what he was getting in Spain. But it does seem a bit of a step down in terms of the club that he was at compared to the club that he's moved to. But the Premier League is the Premier League. It's the biggest league. It's the one with the most managers. And Emery, I think, maybe didn't do himself justice the last time he came to this country. Maybe he'll be hoping to do what Steven Gerrard couldn't this time around.
Yeah, you're right, absolutely right about the sort of the temptation to come to the Premier League. Obviously, I'm absolutely sure that his wages will have gone up significantly in joining Aston Villa, and I think that's part of the appeal, and half the reason that all the best managers want to come here, but also to challenge yourself against the best, and as you rightly point out, a lot of the other top managers in world football at the moment are in England, and you want to sort of prove yourself up against them. And Villa are a club who've they've got money to spend. They've got ambitious owners. It's a great traditional club, really good fan base, and it's a job where you think that Villa with the right a good win behind them could be challenging for Europe and get back up into those spots. I know that's getting more difficult when you throw Newcastle into the mix now as a club with money, but Villa have spent a lot in recent years, and there's real potential there to do something. And I think Emery, as you say, will want to show that he's better than he showed at Arsenal. I think he got a bit of an unfair ride at Arsenal a lot of the time as well, because I don't think the squad was as well built back then as it is now. I think there was some issues with how they did transfers and who they bought. For example, you thinking Nicola Pepe was bought under his watch, and I doubt that was the manager going, I definitely want this player for 72 million. I think some of those decisions were maybe being made above him, and he's shown time and time again in European competition and in Spain just how good a manager he is. So he's going to come in at Villa, make them really, really hard to beat, make that a difficult place to go. Because he's consistently done that with teams throughout his career. So yeah, good to see him back, because I think he's a good character, really good manager, and I think he will improve Aston Villa as well.
I think it'll be a really interesting gauge, really, of Steven Gerrard. Obviously, there's been a few kind of very quick reactions of, oh, look, they've won 4-0 at the weekend after Steven Gerrard's gone. I mean, it's going to have to be a bit more long-term than that to convince me that Gerrard wasn't particularly doing much for them. But I do think there is a ceiling with Aston Villa. Like you mentioned Newcastle there, the top 6 is very hard to get into. There's lots and lots of clubs that spend lots and lots of money now in the Premier League. I don't know quite whether the ambitions at Aston Villa are realistic necessarily. I always thought that when Gerrard went there, it felt like an almost impossible job to do what they wanted him to do. But I suppose if anyone can do it, Unai Emery is probably the level of manager. They went after Tuchel and Pochettino and people like that. Maybe just the next step down. That was probably as good as what they could have got. But I suppose it will kind of show us, whether Steven Gerrard was holding that Villa squad back. Maybe if a better manager comes along and can do something, maybe that's a gauge of where Gerrard is at.
Yeah, I still think, I think they've got issues as well in terms of their squad building. I look at some of the signings they've made in recent years and can't really sort of make any sense of it. So, for example, I look at that forward line and you've got Ings and Watkins, who you'd think would be probably best served playing in a 2. And then he signed Leon Bailey, who is probably an out-and-out winger in a 4-3-3. Little things like that you can't sort of make sense of. And I always thought, I don't really know what Aston Villa's best team looks like. And that's not even a problem the manager can solve. That, if maybe some of those players have been thrust on him, or, if it was his idea to sign him, then that was a poor decision for me, because it doesn't, that mix never seems right. And you're never coming up against a team that knows exactly how it wants to play and what it is. And I think if you're a team like Aston Villa and you're trying to sort of make that step into challenging the top 6, or, just trying to usurp one of them and jump into those European spots, you really have to know what you're about. I look at David Moyes at West Ham, and they sort of have done really well in recent years. With it, he knows exactly what he's signing his players to do. He knows exactly what the system's going to be, and he knows exactly what the football, what type of football they're going to play. And when you do that, you can sort of maximise everything that you've got, and then you can overachieve. And I don't think that's happening at Villa. And that's something that maybe that came from the manager. Maybe that's partly Gerrard's decisions. And we will see now under Emery, whether the signings make a bit more sense, whether a real system comes together, and you know what an Aston Villa team under Unai Emery will look like. And if you can do that, then there is the money there, and like I say, then you're really maximising your potential, and maybe you can achieve something special. It'd be interesting to see how it works out.
Yeah, I think he's got a better chance of getting something together than what Steven Gerrard did on the evidence we saw. But quite whether he can get to the levels that Aston Villa would like him to get to, time will tell. But I think that'll just about do us for this morning. Jurgen Klopp's press conference, a Liverpool player will be alongside him as well later on this evening. I think that's 7 or 8 p.m, but keep an eye out for that on the Blood Red channel later on today. For now, though, that'll do us. We'll see you later.